We are really excited to dive into our first panel discussion, Upholding Company Values in Crises. Insights from compliance, risk and ethics departments on navigating last year's challenges. Joining us on this panel are Cecilia Nazar, VP Compliance at TIA Mobility, Michael Lammert-Braunschweig, Head of Regulatory Affairs, Risk and Compliance at Mercedes Pay, Sven Claudius, Partner Assurance Investigations and Compliance at EY, and Alexandra Belmonte, Chief Compliance Officer at AP Møller-Mærsk. A warm welcome to all the speakers.
So, dear viewers, over the last year, companies have had to endure and overcome unprecedented challenges during the year. The fallout from the war in Ukraine, supply chain insecurity, climate change, a shortage of talent, inflation, and still the aftermath of the corona pandemic. So today, what we want to explore is how compliance departments can help companies navigate these crisis moments and keep employees aligned with company values and principles when times are tough. Dear ECEC viewers and attendees, at the end of the panel discussion, we will have time for a Q&A, so do put your questions in the chat function to the right of the screen under this session Q&A, or just below this screen if you're watching from a mobile device. Now, I'm delighted to be joined by our panel participants from very different sized companies and also industries. Welcome, everyone. So to kick off with, could you just please quickly introduce your company and what industry it is, what size, and also some of the values that are important in your company.
Gladly, so I'm guessing we're going...
Yeah, we can go down the line. Michael, starting with you. Thank you.
Mercedes Pay GmbH. We are a fintech entity within the Mercedes-Benz Group, which is a very vast group of companies, of course, and we are responsible for the payment aspect, the digital payment aspects of in-car payment and outside of car payments. We are a small entity with 70 full-time employees and, well, some trainees, etc. And indeed, the company values that we have are given to us from our group. And the main aspect of that would be integrity. That is the focal point of everything that we do, and that's the key word I want to use today.
Okay, thank you. Cecilia?
So I work for TIA Mobility. We're about 2,000 employees now, a bit more. We operate in the micromobility industry as a scooter and e-bicycle rental company. And the values, so we have 4 pillars, which are trailblaze, rise, play and care, but obviously care is my favorite one.
Okay, thank you. Sven?
Ernst & Young is a professional services organization. We do have more than 300,000 people in over 150 countries. So this is really a global reach that we have, and we try to bring in all these different perspectives and all this expertise to create value for our clients, society, and our people. And this is also our purpose, building a better working world, which is also built on a set of values of also integrity, like Michael mentioned there, but teaming, inclusiveness, of being enthusiastic and having the courage to lead are just some of them.
Okay, thank you. Alexandra?
Yeah, so I'm from AP Møller-Mærsk, being a truly global logistics company. So we're present in 130 countries. We have over 110,000 employees. So we provide integrated logistics solutions. We also operate terminals and container vessels. We are a family-driven company. It's been up in the business for over 100 years. So the values goes to the heart in everything we do. So they guide what we should be doing on a daily basis. And a few years ago, we also introduced a purpose, which is to improve life for all by integrating the world, which of course goes to the very nature of our business.
Okay, so you've brought in a new aspect. Thank you, because so I've got the values. I mean, one of the topics before was do employees actually remember the code of conduct? Do even the leaders remember the values that they've signed in the code of conduct? So I've heard integrity, care, integrity, and doing good through...
So improving life for all by integrating the world.
Right.
But I do know our 5 values.
No, I'm not saying you don't. But so what you haven't mentioned is a purpose in your company. Is that's surely also important in upholding the values if you've understood the purpose first. Cecilia.
Yeah, I mean, the values for us is actually what holds everything together. You see the values everywhere in every document, everything we talk about will come up, the 4 values, but the principle is also related to environment. It's a big deal for us. That's why actually Lawrence created this company. So our purpose is to reduce the number of cars we have, in cities. That is the main purpose. But our everyday work is also, pushed with these values. So it's both together.
Okay, what about your purpose at Mercedes Pay?
So
not reducing the amount of cars, no doubt.
I was going to say, there's a bit of a conflict. At the end of the day, it's we are a component of the entirety of the setup. And one of the aspects here, just looking at sustainability as one of those buzzwords, but it's a really sustainable, it's part of sustainable living on the planet, and that car companies have to go through this huge transformation. And our part in doing so is to ensure that it's a smooth and luxury experience, not just that, but also the whole life cycle experience of owning a vehicle and anything that goes with the car, that the payments around it and the services that go with it can be smoothly used by all the people. But it's just this, it enables or enhances the brand identity of the car, I would say, if you are able to operate with what you own or what you drive.
Okay, so it always has to align with the bigger company that you're part of. Okay, Sven, EY's purpose.
Well, it's building a better working world, and this is really based on the values that we have there, but it intends to create this long-term value for society, for our own people, but for our clients in first place. Then.
Okay, so are company values actually core values or just a buzzword? Because, for example, Enron, considered one of the biggest fraud scandals in history, they had some great values: respect, integrity, communication, excellence, and they also put them in their annual report. So how can you ensure that values are incorporated? Alexandra.
At Maersk, the core values is part of the governance framework, which sets out the code of conduct, and of course, code of conduct is hinged on the values. But I think it's important when you have new employees joining a company, they must form part of the onboarding to set the expectations very early on. Then, of course, for any manager and people who have been in the company for some time, they need to walk the talk, because if you don't, they will become buzzwords. So we do have regular training on the code of conduct and referring to the values, and then try to drive everything we do with the values. And it comes very much from the family, and I think that's what makes it so successful. So what we have noticed, if we have an investigation, and I will tell them, well, you breached the commit rule on anti-corruption, for example, which is our governance rule, you get a reaction. But if I tell them, well, you haven't acted in accordance to our value of uprightness, I get a much stronger emotional reaction. So I think for compliance officers, there's lots of opportunities with having values, because they go to the heart of what we do. I think people can resonate with them because they make sense. So I think it's for us to also be a bit clever how to use them to actually drive the compliance and not making them buzzwords.
Okay, what would you say, Michael, for incorporating them and going beyond buzzwords that are just thrown around?
I think I would like to point to the car industry in general, especially the car industry and what happened in the past years with the necessity of a transformative shift in the industry due to, I would call them past mistakes here, in especially the German car industry. And therefore, it's a mantra-like repetition of these core values, and they're truly lived. I can wholeheartedly say that is the case, and it really strikes me as a very positive change in attitude. And so by all means, they're not buzzwords, they're truly lived.
Okay. Cecilia, would you add anything to that?
No, I think that's in alignment with what I think. I mean, it is hard, especially during crisis. Like, I think, and I mean, we'll probably talk about it later, but I think all this is even more important when you're going through a tough time in company, because you tend to not forget those values, but put them aside because your priorities are about, financial matters or just surviving, really. Mm-hmm. So it is, harder to put those values on top of everything. But that's where we also need to work harder and show our face and work closer to the top management to remind them what's important and why we're here to start with.
Okay, well, can you think of any consequences if the values are not upheld, Sven?
Well, I like this aspect of looking at it in terms of crisis there, and I think we also EY as an organization had its challenges in the last year that we've been dealing with challenges like, for example, or Project Everest, which was set up to separating the audit business from the consulting business. Which was intended to really address needs in the market and from regulators. And undergoing this project, the preparations there was quite a strain for some of our core values. For example, the teaming, really pulling teams apart there, but also calling this project off, which was a burden for people being enthusiastic, trying to be the first movers there, having the courage to lead. This was quite a bold project there. So it definitely was a burden. On the upside, it was a chance to learn a lot out of it, to unlock innovation, to start important conversations, and so I think there's always an upside to these times of crisis and these challenges. Yeah.
Okay, can you give us an example of a challenge that you faced in your company in the past year, and how values helped to uphold the employees in that time, Cecilia?
Yeah, I mean, for the last 12 to 18 months, it's been a period of big change for TIER. We suffered a lot with the world events, inflation, people less willing to spend their money overall, competition being tough. So we had to restructure, so reduce our headcounts, reduce our costs, and so on. So all that had, an impact, especially with values like care and play. So, it's hard to have fun when you're doing the job of 2 people, or, you really need to deliver faster. So I think that was, a big challenge, but also care. When people are overly stressed, and we also had survival guilt for the people who were still in the company, because we were, a very fast-growing company. Everyone was super tight. When you see your colleague leaving, it's hard. So we also had to work on care more, but it is a challenge because there's so much to deliver. So I would say that's the 2 values that were impacted. We're still working on it, but we have limits. For example, play, we can't do company-wide parties, for example. It's a very specific example. But it did mean a lot for TIER because we were, it's a very young company, very lively, everyone's super, close and so on. So it was a bit hard. But we find other solutions like team events, like smaller events. So we tried to get that play. We tried to find also funner ways of doing it via, comms and so on. So yeah, that would be the best example.
Okay, Alexandra, can you give us an example of a challenge lost in the past year that was then helped through with the values in your company?
I think there's been too many challenges, to be honest, if you look at the world scene. But I think Russia's invasion of Ukraine was definitely a challenge which emphasized the value of having a purpose and also taking actions in accordance with the values. So Maersk very early on decided to pull out of Russia and cease all the business. And I think that was sort of an easy decision, particularly if you are based in the Nordics. But upholding that decision and doing so on a global level is much more challenging, because I think the further away you are from the conflict, the less you understand the implications. So there was lots of teaming up with the sales, the customer experience teams, etc., to communicate to the customers that this is our decision, this is how we execute it. Which at times really stressed and put pressure on the values of taking care of our people, protecting our brand, but also caring for tomorrow. So we do see a lot of challenges. And of course, we're also seeing a tougher market condition where people are consuming less. Our freight rates are getting normalized, which means we're no longer in the bonanza time after the COVID, which is actually also very interesting. When COVID hit, you thought that the market would drop, and the expectations we had, what would happen, and I think that goes for all our companies, actually changed. So I think for us it was a booming industry because everyone was sitting, working from home, ordering things, and now it's a challenging going back to normal. normal. And so I think you need to be clever on how to use them, but of course they do get stress test. And I think there's a big difference on where you are in the business, where you are externally, and which part of the world. But I think with what we've really seen with Russia is a moving. So before the legal threshold was good enough. Everyone said, well, if you keep it in the legal framework, then that's good. But I think with the latest crisis, that's out of the window. And I think Sonja touched on it earlier as well, with the perception and reputation, that's the new threshold for companies, which actually demands much more. And I think if you have values, it will help, because it's so important you have a consistent storyline to tell. Because if you don't, then that will be taken apart and put you in a very difficult situation.
Okay, so lots of interesting points then. One of the ones is a cultural difference within a company. So EY is massive. Sven, let's take a look at the cultural differences there. Is that a challenge to keep everyone on the same spectrum of values if you have huge cultural differences across the company?
Of course, it's a challenge. Yeah, of course, and you really have to consider all those different cultures that you have in an organization as global as EY is. But that's also a nice challenge to take up on, really, to get all those different perspectives and all those different people really into define like common values, have a common code of conduct, and that can really be of value then when it comes to times of crisis. And we can see how long-lasting these challenges can really be. You've mentioned the Enron case. I believe that was over 20 years ago, and it's still very present to us and to our community, and we're still talking about the burden it had on these values that organization had.
Okay. The other thing, Alexandra, you touched upon is perception and reputational damage. With the Wirecard case, there was something quite close to, well, very close to EY. So that's a situation where values were put under pressure, obviously. What are the learnings out of that? Tell us what's happened internally there.
Well, the Wirecard case came up in summer 2020. So that's in the past years, in those past 3 years, a lot of accomplishments and actions have been undertaken there to really improve quality of our services, to regain a lot of the trust from stakeholders, from the market, from more people. So there are quite a lot of achievements that have been made there. I think it did not have a true global reach. It's more something that really was more or less concentrated in our German and European market here, and therefore it was a burden for some of our values. But I think with all the action that has been undertaken and all the achievements that we were really able to regain a lot of that trust, if we're looking at that value.
Can you give us a couple of examples of key things to regain trust after a crisis has happened?
Well, usually it's the action that you take. So it's communication, which is really important. It's having like honest conversations, and it's the tone from the top. So this is I mean, we all know that this is one of the most important elements of every culture, every company culture, to really have leaders that walk the talk, as you mentioned it. And we had that in Germany. We were fortunate enough to have very strong leadership, a very honest, open, transparent leadership, and this was a huge part of really regaining and rebuilding these values.
Okay, thank you. So, Cecilia, you touched upon it before. So, what I understand is an onslaught of regulatory constrictions, but you've got limited resources. So, what's the motivation like in your compliance department, given that sort of situation?
Yeah, I mean, after 18 months, it is harder. The motivation is not as high, but the team are also getting hyped about other things. So, basically, in order to survive, we join forces with other departments. So now under me, we have compliance, risk, cybersecurity, data protection, and health and safety. And so that allowed my core compliance team to work on other subjects that they didn't know about or wanted to, work in and didn't have the opportunity before. So they're also excited about these new opportunities that this, difficult time brings. And we're also working closely with other team. So we had to really just work as a team. So the whole company needs to work as a team, basically. So they're also working, I'm working on HR matters, for example, at the moment to really focus on our care value. So the team is the same. They're trying to work harder on other topics. So for example, I have someone in my team who really wanted to learn about data protection. So he's doing now a certificate on data protection, GDPR, and now internally he's working on those matters. So it is also, it opens up doors as well for some people.
Okay, Michael, have you experienced that as well? Sort of more cross-enterprise collaboration?
Very good question. I think it's a balance sheet question at the end of the day, depending on the type of company. So I'm in the fortunate position to work for a group that takes these matters so extremely seriously that they're willing to commit the necessary resources to do so. So it's not a question of make do with what you have, but actually there was a greater focus on ensuring that there's proper compliance in all the different fields that we're looking at. And maybe just to tag along with some of the other items that were touched upon, in particular relating to crises. I think for the automotive industry or automobile industry in Germany, yes, of course, there is a crisis moment going on at the moment, which is an economic question. But if you, retrospective, COVID wasn't so much of a problem. People were buying cars a lot, so that was a positive thing. But the forward outlook is so extremely serious, especially here in the European Union, looking at the regulatory landscape, both here internal as well as external, and this dichotomy between, at least for the European car industry, of a physical presence. Where do we build cars? How do we build cars? I think that's a question more for my group companies. But from our perspective, we're now looking more to how do we handle money flows, for example? What do we have to look at? Where does the money come from? All these new aspects that weren't there before, and committing the necessary resource to that was a key objective for the entity as a whole. So I would say we're in a lucky position and we take it so seriously that we can deliver on that.
Okay. Do you see companies at a competitive disadvantage due to the regulatory onslaught?
Yes.
Especially in Europe?
Yes. So the straight answer to that is yes, because in the European Union, we are still seeing ourselves, and thankfully in part we are, the standard setter worldwide. GDPR, I think, is a great example of something that is transnational, that is just defining the laws in most other countries, and they follow the basic ideas of what's happening there. But the overreach, the regulatory overreach in parts is such that the basic idea behind it is great, but it keeps going and going and going and grinding on, and other countries just have a bit more of a nimble setup. That's both on a physical presence question as well as on a digital presence question. And so the straight answer to that is yes.
Straining resources.
Very much so, yes.
Okay. How do you advise clients, Sven? Do you see this trend as well? Resources within the compliance department are strained and...
Balancing resources with the regulatory onslaught, you've called it, is always a topic in conversation with clients. And we're looking at a situation where we have a lot of new regulations, expectations from regulators, national, international, sometimes in variations across Europe. So the challenge for companies really is to implement these regulations into operational measures, and not only once, but sustainably in a permanent way, in a systematic approach. I have a lot of conversations with clients here, and those clients that are really successful in adapting to these expectations are those that really sit down now and re-evaluate their risk strategy, how they manage risks, perform holistic risk assessments to reallocate their limited resources to the top compliance risks there. I think this is really, really key next to making use of technology and data for analytics to be able to really identify where top compliance risks are and to allocate those resources there. Because I think the topic of resources is really one that will have like a bigger impact in future than it even has now.
Okay, Alexandra, massive company you're working with with huge, diverse industry. So, what risk intelligence tools are you working with? Can you tell us a little bit, without naming the specific tools, but the kind of tools that you're working with in order to mitigate risk? Yeah, looking
I think
ahead.
the starting point is to kind of find your key jurisdictions, because when you operate in 130 countries, you can't keep up with everything happening in every single country. And I think that's a pain point for any company. So you need to identify what's your key jurisdictions, but also high-risk jurisdictions. And I think regulators have actually come quite far away to keep updated, so you could subscribe to what's going on. So I think that's, I mean, then you get the truth from the source. So that, of course, we do. Then consultancy businesses like EY and law firms, they do also have a very good, like, taking the pulse of what's happening and send out newsletters. So that's also a cheap tool to get, because you get free advice subscribing to the newsletters. But then, of course, we do also pay for services, and that will go for the screening we do. That there you buying an insurance as well, to kind of go with a reputational good service provider, and also when you do more in-depth due diligence. But I think you need to know your service providers. There's no like size that fits all, so you end up with several, and then have to build that together.
Mm-hmm. Michael, can you tell us about your risk intelligence tools, the kinds of things that you're using?
I can't name them directly.
No. I understand that, yeah.
But what I would like to add there is that the array or the availability of services in general has so vastly improved and has increased in quantity. It's overwhelming, to be honest. It's truly overwhelming having to determine which one is best suited for your entity. And by all means, there's this drive into AI. So there is transaction monitoring tools, and there's tons of them out there. But once you've selected something that actually fits to your company, I have to say that it vastly improves efficiency. So by all means, it is the future going forward. Everyone's going to use those.
So does that lead to new skills needed by compliance officers? Are you looking more for data analytics skills?
Clear answer, yes. So there is going to be a shift in the abilities or the requirements for individuals who work in this particular field to understand, and it's sort of a synergy effect between technology as well as aptitude in understanding where are risks, where are the actual risks, where could they lie, identifying those, and then using those tools effectively to mitigate any sort of risks arising from those, yeah.
Okay. With resources under strain, Cecilia, what kind of data-driven insights and technological solutions help you to respond to problems?
We still have them, and that's actually one of the things that our top management were very strict about. Is we're not changing that; we're keeping it. So yeah, we use it for screening, notably, and for whistleblowing, which are the two key ones for me. We also have a bit of help for trainings. So we do rely on that, and heavily, especially for screening, because it's super data heavy, and I don't have the staff for that. I still need to have someone managing it to get the results, but that's, yeah, I need to outsource that. But I think one important element here is, all companies now will use third parties for this. The important element is, when you're going for a crisis, especially compliance officers should stop and ask themselves, is this actually still the right tool for me? Yeah. And really question that. And there are so many tools out there, as Michael mentioned. Actually, there's maybe a better tool that fits your current situation, that's a bit cheaper or helping you more, doing more work for you. There's so many, different possibilities there. And I think we really need to challenge ourselves, on a yearly basis, 6 months basis, on like, is this really the best solution for us? And also develop internally. There's some things that we developed with the help of our tech teams. Internally, it was cheaper, obviously, and also we know the tool perfectly because we created it. So I fine-tune the tool to what I need. So that's also a solution if you can make it happen.
Okay. Can you give us an example, Alexander, of data-driven insight that you'd be looking for to solve a particular problem?
Yes, we're looking at continuous monitoring, where we actually get access to the finance system. So we can, I wouldn't say it's real time, but it is on the day, where we have keywords and algorithms built in that will then flesh out suspicious transactions to look at. And we see that as a key driver to improve the compliance program. So not being proactive and kind of catch the transaction, then follow up, instead of waiting for someone to come to us or even have a regulator knocking on the door. So I think the continuous monitoring is one of our key flagships that we're currently looking at.
And what are the things that you're monitoring? What behaviors are you monitoring?
What we would phrase as suspicious transactions when it comes to the compliance topics, which would be gifts and entertainment, traveling, that they do follow our code of conduct, our value, our rule on anti-corruption, for example. And then the keywords and the algorithms will flash out transactions that warrants a closer look at. But here you have to also tailor it so you get relevant hits and not spammed with too many results that you can't look at.
Okay, so Michael, would you agree that there's been a shift from a reactory and advisory role to being more proactive in recent years? And if so, can you give us some examples?
I'm assuming more in the compliance department in general.
Yeah.
Yes. So I would even venture to say that in times of crisis, and also with I think today several speakers have addressed this, ethical questions in general, that the compliance department or the people in compliance are now acting as some sort of moral guidance. I have to be very careful with this language, of course, but yeah, there has been a tremendous shift. So it's not just a team or a department that approaches the C-level and says, there's a problem, we have to mitigate this, there are new rules, let's do this, but rather acting as some sort of general guidance in which direction, from a moral compass perspective, maybe the company might want to go. So that's been a tremendous shift in the take-up of the appreciation of the work that the compliance department has to do. That would be my take on it.
But that was due to the specific scandals in the automotive industry?
No, I would say that is a general trend. So not just in the automotive industry. I'm looking at every type of industry, be it any sort of financial scandals. I'm looking at, well, in the financial industry in general, looking across the pond a bit more with a recent court case that is currently going on in the crypto sphere. Just this whole notion of, was that the right thing to do, where you had someone who was advocating a morally positive thing or an attitude, and then at the end of the day you have quite the opposite result. So not just the Enron scandal that you've highlighted, but quite the opposite, with someone being proactively morally righteous and then doing the exact opposite. So I would say that shift is visible in each of the departments that I've spoken to outside of the automotive industry.
But that's the whole point about values not just being buzzwords, but actually getting employees to comply by the values. Any thoughts on that, Sven?
Well, I think we've said a lot about that, and I think that the compliance team department can really be a driver for these ethical values, but they can't form an ethical culture on their own. So the idea is always to partner up there, get other departments on board. Communication, HR, maybe use the management itself as multipliers for compliance. Compliance is a management task there. So train the managers, get them or provide them with necessary information to act as multipliers of these values in the organization.
Okay. In your dealings with companies, I mean, after one of the criticisms with the corona pandemic was that companies didn't see it coming or hadn't planned risk for it coming. Post-pandemic, has there been any changes? Do you see companies being more proactive?
Well, what we see is that a lot of these new regulations coming towards companies really affect the organization on many different levels. Compliance organizations really have to reach out into the organization and to understand how they manage these new risks, how they allocate roles and responsibilities there, how the governance is set up there, cross-functional with other teams on board. And I think that this is a necessary change, and it's a good change. And I think that compliance organizations really have everything that they need to be able to do so. They have this reach into the organization. They have the expertise, the methodologies. So it's actually quite an exciting time for compliance organizations to reform their new area of responsibility there.
So you see risk planning has improved?
Yeah.
post-pandemic, yeah?
May I just barge in?
Please do.
Yeah, so no, it's just recently there was a really excellent article in The Economist on the political CEO. So the things that we're saying here aren't just coming maybe from a pure compliance perspective, but that the challenges for the C-level have become vastly more political than ever before. And again, at times they're looking for more guidance in these fields, because if you're all alone there and you're trying to make a political or an impactful decision that may be perceived from a political sphere as, I don't know, dangerous, contentious, or maybe even detrimental to a nation or a local state, then that is something where we're trying, or at least we are trying to somehow offer some sort of guidance on that level. So I think it's a trend that is not just visible from an ego perspective, but also from a general perspective in the industry.
Okay, well, with Manuela's presentation on ESG this morning, is there a tendency towards a compliance director becoming more of an ESG director? I mean, you were talking about having your values in the ESG report.
Yeah, so we have an ESG strategy and we have 13 or 14 categories, don't quote me on it, but 5 are prioritized. And there we're very lucky because one of them is business ethics, being our compliance program, which gives us like the leverage we need to the executive management, our board of directors, but also you have an external reporting requirement. So then you have more pressure on really succeeding with your KPIs. Then, of course, you can discuss, as we did offset, that the KPIs, do they really measure the compliance culture? But that has really helped pushing the compliance agenda. And I think the ambition also motivates the team and the organization, and it sets the tone from the top that we take this seriously. But then, of course, it comes with other challenges as well, because ESG is fairly new. There's lots of new regulation coming in under what we phrase as ESG, with the corporate sustainability, due diligence directive, reporting directive, etc., which, of course, cross across the organization. So it's kind of, as you mentioned, Sven, like reaching to other functions and see how do we come together to actually map and mitigate this risk. And that it's lots of fun, it's challenging, but it's also overwhelming.
Do you see a compliance director role moving more towards an ESG director role? Michael?
I'll gladly start. I think it's very important to distinguish each of the letters in the ESG field. And so the E I would very much like to separate from the S and the G.
Okay.
And yes and no. So vicariously through the compliance department, regulators are trying to infuse or prescribe to companies what they can and cannot do. So the laws started off with a general lofty idea, let's be happy and save the environment. But all of a sudden, especially in the European Union, these rules became more and more stringent. And the one key hole, if you will, where they could be fit into a company without having to go through corporate law, for example, through commercial law in general, was the compliance department. By just adding or piling on top the requirements that are being set and that have to be adhered to, the compliance department is given more and more tasks. And so yes, sorry to answer that question, yes indeed, I would say that it is again a transformative, I'll stop using that buzzword, a transformative movement within the compliance department, that you have to now adhere and ensure that you're compliant with all these requirements. And yeah, they've simply increased in size. And if you want to put the label ESG on it, be my guest, sure, yes.
Okay, I think we have some questions from the viewers, so thank you for adding your questions. Gustavo Fleury Guzman, what is the impact and importance of human rights related to compliance when considering what to do while we are in a crisis and when trying to uphold the company values? So the impact and importance of human rights related to compliance when considering what to do in a crisis and when trying to uphold the company values. Who would like to answer that?
I guess I can take that one.
Thank you.
Take that one. It's a very good question. And of course, I think human rights goes very much to the heart of what compliance do, but it is a separate discipline with very specific questions. But I think, and of course, I know this is heavily debated, but coming from a compliance perspective, I think there's lots of synergies where the human rights specialists and compliance teams should definitely team up, because the tools you have in a compliance program, you can easily adapt them to also support any human rights risk assessment you need to do or mapping exercise. And also that a compliance program needs to be risk-based. And that's what we do on a daily basis. We assess the risk. And I think there's lots of synergies. Having said that, of course, human rights also have the HR element, the employee and labor element. And that's where you also need to these days you can't be isolated into one function. You actually need to work across functions.
Yeah.
And given that that's something compliance officers have done for a long time, because we've often been seen as a roadblock. And I think now we're on a transition journey, to use your buzzword, that we're enabling business, we're a differentiator, that the human rights function or discipline should kind of tag along on that one.
Mm-hmm. Cecilia, can you give us some examples of cross-functional collaboration, like Alexandra is talking specifically also with human rights?
Yeah, I mean, compliance owns human rights, actually, too.
Okay.
Let's add one to the list. And actually, it's a big deal, actually, for us, especially in crisis. Well, also with every regulation regarding supply chain. So we have warehouses as well and supply chain matters to consider. So human rights is a topic. And it's part of our compliance governance and compliance framework and so on. So it's as important as all the other compliance pillars for us. But it's a harder one because, I mean, at least for me, is that we're, international. I don't have oversight on everything that's happening, especially that our scooters are made, in Asia. So I'm not there seeing what's happening. And I try to implement as much as I can to make sure human rights are respected. But it's a challenge when you're a multinational company and you don't have oversight. But you use also externals to help you with that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, what sort of externals are you using?
So for example, with our key suppliers, we work with auditors, experts in the field who know how a warehouse should function, how all the rights are respected. They do the audits for us. They know also local laws. I am not an expert on every single local regulation, so they are. So yeah, they help us. That's an example of third parties that help us with human rights matters.
Mm-hmm. That's where EY can come in to help.
Well, hopefully, yeah.
Okay,
Maybe.
Okay, so thank you. We've got another question from Andrea Di Carado, I think is the name. Thank you, Andrea. Who is in charge of control that all your values are well known and applied across all the organizations? So that's a great communication question. Is there a specific business unit? And if so, what power has it besides moral persuasion, I think the thing. So control of all the values that are well known and applied across all the organization. Cecilia, you're nodding a lot. Would you like to
for me,
answer that?
Clear cut.
Yeah.
I think management are responsible for that. They are in charge to make sure their company, every single employee is aware of their value, and it starts from recruitment. When you're hiring someone, you need to make sure that they're the sort of people who will comply with values. They have the same value. They live by those values in their normal, ordinary life. So I think it starts there. But I think in the end, everyone is responsible for it. I mean, I know it's very cliche to say, but you are. As soon as you decide to join a company, you decide to adhere to those values and therefore to push them, uphold them. Then have a specific business unit. We don't have a specific business unit. I mean, it could be an option, but I don't know if it would bring much value, to be honest, because for me, it still needs to come from the top. It's the tone from the top values. And so what power has it besides moral? I don't really understand the last part of that question, but moral persuasion. Yeah, I'm not sure about that question. But in any case, I think it should come from the top, the control.
Okay. Michael, would you like to add to that? Who's in charge of control that all your values are well known and applied across all the organization?
I mean, without having to reiterate what our shareholder statement says at the end of the year, which is just from a functional organizational perspective, I think the two main aspects are the tone from the top question. It's continuously reiterated, but not in a just a repetitive manner, but in a truly engaging manner from our top management. So it's
at Daimler.
Yes. So it's a Mercedes-Benz. Sorry.
Daimler
is the truck section. No worries. I have to be very careful about this compliance. But the idea is the tone from the top message is one that is honest, is true, direct, and it works. And the second thing is just to add every single employee every single day. That's one of the key messages as well. To take charge, everyone needs to take charge and ensure that you do the right thing. Of course, it's a loaded word, but the right thing every single day at work.
Okay.
That's it.
Thank you. So compliance teams have helped to navigate the crisis over the last year. Looking forward into the near future, Alexandra, one main topic coming up for compliance departments.
I think we already cover it, but I think it's all the regulations that is coming in with good intention. I think we can all resonate with the regulations, but it is a lot of things coming in, which is quite advanced, where there's like basically the basics are not put in place because that's not a legal requirement, which will create what I think will be an uneven playing field. I also think that the regulations coming in is trying to drive the agenda, which I think most of us will agree with. But looking from a global perspective, we have different maturity rates. So it feels very much that the obligations put on companies to drive the regulators' agenda. And it will be difficult to enforce because you need to enforce it in places that do not subscribe to the same regulations or maybe the same ideas. And then I think that will be the biggest challenge for companies and compliance function on how to bridge that.
Okay, driving the agenda of the regulators. Thank you. Sven, a new challenge on the horizon.
I absolutely agree with what Alexandra said on balancing.
No, you have to pick a new one.
I'm coming to that point, balancing new regulations and the resources. And I think the challenge also is in the latter one, the resources. It's really the retention of the people we have in the compliance teams, trying to keep them on board, upskilling them to the new expectations there around technologies, but also those new risk areas that we're having, and getting the right people on board. And I see that as a big challenge coming towards us, because compliance departments are growing, they're not getting smaller, and there's a huge demand for people. So I would really recommend for keeping those people you have on board.
Okay, well, that's great news for our ECEC community. You're in the right business. So, Cecilia, new challenges up ahead.
You stole mine.
Well, what about the need to make a profit?
So I think
colliding with the values.
One, right? It's making profit, making sure that we're financially stable, and it'll impact us. But I don't know if it's a challenge and opportunity, this one, basically, for a compliance department. Basically, this is allowing us also to have oversight on everything. And so from a risk perspective, this is a great opportunity for compliance officers that I have a view on every single risk we have in a company, especially the financial ones, which are super important in a company. So it's an opportunity as well, but also the challenge will be upskilling myself and my team on new matters. So I don't know, recently I had to look at, accounting matters and tax compliance, which is a very specialized area. Not my favorite either, but I had to look at it because it's super important and you have huge risks, especially in tax. So it is a challenge, but at the same time, it could be an opportunity for later.
Okay, thank you. Michael, you have the last word. A challenge up ahead that we need to prepare for.
Multipolar world and conflicts. Those are the two.
What do you mean by multipolar world?
Battle of the systems, battle of the, who's the hegemon worldwide? East-West, North-South divide. I know it's a classic thing, but it's come up again in greater severity than ever before. And anything that goes along with it. So all the crises that I think in one of the speeches today were mentioned or highlighted that result out of that, maybe food scarcity, water scarcity, hunger, etc. So the big ones.
Wow, thank you so much for all your input. Thank you also for sending your questions, ECEC community. I would say there are a lot of challenges up ahead, but to take Cecilia's word, also a great opportunity, and you're in great need.